Hello, and welcome to the Banff at Altitude podcast, celebrating 50 years of adventure storytelling from the Banff Centre Mountain Film and Book Festival. Since its beginning in 1976, the Banff Centre Mountain Film and Book Festival has been a gathering place in celebration of all things mountain culture. The yearly festival, hosted at Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity, fosters an appreciation of the world's mountain places by creating opportunities for people to share and find inspiration in mountain experiences, ideas, and visions. Over the years, we've spoken to hundreds of incredible adventurers who share their spectacular and moving stories. My name is Joanna Croston, and I'm going to be digging through our festival archives to revive some of our favorite presentations from the past to get you stoked for what's to come in 2025, our 50th anniversary. And well, hopefully you'll be stoked for life in general. In continuing with this tradition of sharing stories and connections, we hope this podcast will inspire you to explore, preserve, and enjoy the great outdoors. On this episode of Banff at Altitude, we're diving into the climbing world of Lynn Hill, a true icon of the sport. Lynn is known for smashing records in the 80s and 90s and was a key player in the Yosemite climbing scene. She was the first person to free climb the nose on El Cap, as well as the first woman to redpoint 512D, 513A, and 514A. Her career is nothing short of extraordinary. We welcomed Lynn Hill to the Banff stage in 2016, and we're excited that she'll be returning for our 50th anniversary this year. In conversation with writer and renowned climber Greg Child, this is Lynn Hill from the Banff main stage.
Welcome to Banff.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thanks for inviting me back.
We were talking backstage a few minutes ago, trying to remember what was the year that you and I first met? It's kind of a long time ago.
1978.
Yep. We were kind of, as I recall, young bums in Yosemite.
Dirtbags.
Yeah. We were true dirtbags. She eventually grew out of the dirtbag phase and became kind of a bit of royalty of climbing. I'm still a dirtbag. You're a California kid, right?
I hate to say that I grew up in Orange County, Fullerton. I had never seen a picture of rock climbing. I was really interested in climbing, so I'd climb the telephone poles and trees and things like that. But gymnastics was a perfect sport for me. I walked into the gymnasium to go get my brother from a swim practice, and I kind of wandered around and saw the gymnasium, and there was no girls' gymnastics program there, and so they just said, come here, we'll teach you how to do some things. And they spotted me on a few things, and it just went from there. And
it looks like you were good at it.
Well, actually, my sister had said, why don't you try to do the splits with me, or, let's work on it. And apparently, she was pretty impressed because I was able to do the splits pretty much straight away. So they called that double jointed or something. I don't know. I'm not as flexible as that anymore, but I can still stretch pretty well.
I have a suspicion that was a useful thing in climbing, being double jointed.
Well, just being flexible. Yeah. Definitely. Great foundation for climbing.
How did you get from that to climbing?
Well, so my older sister's boyfriend saw a little notice in an outdoor store, and it said something about belaying and rappelling class. And so back then, in Orange County, we didn't really have cliffs nearby, so they had like some kind of cement block. I didn't go that day, because I was about 11 when he did that. My sister's 5 years older than me. Actually, less than 5 years older than me, and I'm child number 5. So they took the lesson and then bought Royal Robbins Rockcraft, and then there was Advanced Rockcraft.
Yep.
And back then, you just pretty much learned by doing with just minimal instruction. So they had a little bit of experience, and they knew that I would probably be good at it. So they said, well, why don't you come out and try climbing with us? And I remember my oldest sister, her nickname was Mom because she was the oldest, and if she didn't know the answer to something, she'd make up one that sounded good. And she didn't want to admit that she was afraid of leading. It was really her boyfriend that liked to climb, and she'd go along, but it really wasn't her thing. So she taught my other sister and I the basics of how to tie webbing into what they called a Swiss seat, which was a primitive form of a harness. and gave me some shoes that were a little bit too big and said, okay, go up and clip those bolts up there. It was a slab, which is quite insecure if you don't know anything about climbing, the whole idea of frictioning on this granite slab. And I was pretty scared, especially when I had to go up pretty high to get to the first bolt. And I looked down and I said, well, what happens if I fall now? And she said, oh, just go up and clip that bolt. And then I clipped it and I felt pretty good until she said, well, now you have to climb above it. And intuitively, I knew that that was scary, but I think in retrospect, I reflected on the day, and I think that excitement and just being outside, and I still remember the smells and the color of the light, and it was just an amazing experience that marked the future of my life, just pursuing climbing.
And you knew from that moment that you would do it?
I knew that I wanted to do it again.
Uh-huh.
As much as possible. It didn't take long before I was begging to tag along on weekend excursions to places like Joshua Tree.
Right. So the California cliffs were really your formative thing, but we're jumping probably quite a few years between when you went up that slab for the first time. And this, to me, an iconic image of you and John Long in Camp 4 in about 78. That says so much about the spirit of things back in those days. The valley in spring and all of that stuff. Talk a little bit to that.
Well, so I started when I was 14 years old, and I met John on my second trip to Yosemite. And I was really impressed by him because he recited this poem. And I was impressed by how smart he was. You know, I was used to being around climbers that, you know, wouldn't recite poetry. And I was really impressed by his build. He had some amazing muscles and a commanding personality. So I was literally under his wing and quite happy to be encouraged by him, because it really didn't occur to me to be on the forefront of climbing. But I was hanging out with this group of people that was just really in the beginning of the Stone Masters era. And I was on the younger end. John's 8 years older than me, so...
He was a bit of a cradle snatcher, wasn't he?
Perhaps. I was an adult, though.
Okay, good. Just getting that out of the way.
Barely. But I actually met my first boyfriend in Yosemite before I met John. And I was tagging along on one of those excursions with my sister. She went up to meet my brother and her boyfriend, who were climbing the Lost Arrow Spire. She, of course, did not want to team up with me and climb, because when you go into the valley and you look up at these huge walls, it's pretty intimidating, no matter who you are, I think. So she pretty much just said, I'm not going to do anything. And, you know, around the campfire in Camp 4, I met Charlie, who's a year older than me, and he had experience on big wall climbs. So he took me up Half Dome the second year I went back. So I was 17 when I climbed my first big wall.
Charlie Rowe.
With Charlie Rowe.
I climbed the nose with Charlie.
Yeah. Awesome guy.
It's a small world out there, you know.
Yeah.
Was this that year you're talking about, climbing Half Dome? Is this
that year? And I'm wearing a T-shirt. So I know what year it is. My memory's not that good, but it says 1977 on it, on that T-shirt.
Ah, so it does.
And that was with Charlie. You can see that it's Half Dome in the background.
That's a good idea, putting the year of things on your clothing. I think I'll be doing that from now on. Like, I have socks that say right and left, and that helps a fair bit. You were really one of very few women climbers in the valley at the time. Well, there's names like Beverly Johnson, for example. Was Beverly someone who influenced you?
Absolutely. In 1978, Beverly soloed the dihedral wall. I think it took her something like 10 days. And I was really impressed by her. And then 2 years later, she and her husband were involved in filmmaking, and Mike Hoover was her husband, and they were involved in this competition called the Survival of the Fittest, which was great for us dirtbag climbers. It was a way to possibly earn some prize money before climbing competitions came along. And so she called me up and asked me if I wanted to compete in it, and I said, wow, sure. So I actually got to meet her and hang out with her, and she was a really inspiring person because she was just so easygoing and game for anything.
Yeah, I vaguely remember her from those days in the valley. She had real personality and fire in her, that's for sure. And some British magazine interviewer was quizzing her about her climbing career. And back then, 5'10" was like a really hard grade to climb. And she says, it was to Ken Wilson, and she said, Ken, it's not about how many 5'10s you've led, it's about how many 5'10 climbers you've laid.
Yes.
And this reserved British editor sort of took 2 steps backwards and published it in his magazine. But, I mean, how many women climbers were there in the scene back then?
Well, one woman that you don't see a lot of photos of, but was there from the beginning, even a little bit before me, is Mari Gingery. And she was, and still is, a good friend of mine. I just saw her last weekend in Joshua Tree. She and I would talk about how we would approach things and kind of compare our beta. And the men, usually had different sequences. So it was not just about the climbing, but just about that camaraderie of being with another woman and knowing that we weren't crazy oddballs, because it was a pretty esoteric sport of nonconformists and just misfits of society, it seemed. So that's actually a group of what we call the Stone Masters back then. It was sort of a loosely defined term. It used to mean the first people who did these 2 test pieces in Idlewild, which is another climbing area in Southern California. There was a technical 511 called Valhalla. And if you were one of the first 10 people to do that, you were a Stone Master. Oh. But after that, it kind of grew into more of just the culture of the people that were pushing the limits in free climbing. And I was definitely right in there with John and a group of people, Mari Gingery and Mike Leklinski and Dean Fidelman. His book, Yosemite Climbing in the 50s, won the award for Best Images, so he's been committed to photography ever since those days.
Also known as Bullwinkle.
Bullwinkle, yeah.
Everyone has a nickname in Yosemite, it seems. And this is?
Well, that would be the lightning bolt at the base of Midnight Lightning, which was the true test piece. And that boulder problem is probably one of the most historic ones I know of. It was done by John Backer, and, well, actually, it was first done by Ron Kalk, and then a hold broke, and then Backer was the first one to do it in the state that it is now. But it took a long time for anyone else to repeat it. And there were some European climbers like Patrick Edlanger hanging around in the forest watching these guys do this hard free climbing. And then Patrick went back to France and became an instant celebrity because he kind of imported this California style of climbing in the way of a film called Opera Verticale. It was primetime television back when there were only a few stations in France. And it was just such a cool thing. France was ready for that kind of a personality. He was free climbing barefoot in the Verdun, in short shorts, running, jogging, and even slacklining.
And about what year would that be?
Probably in the 80s, maybe 1980.
Because there seemed to be a bit of an evolution from where Yosemite was the kind of the focal point of hard climbing with the Stone Master thing going on. And then it seemed to be adopted and taken over by the French in the 80s. Is that correct?
I would say that's correct. There was a little bit of back and forth. The British climbers were very hardcore in pushing free climbing, and the Americans were kind of on the same page about style. And in the 80s, in America, there was a lot of controversy about this issue of rappel-placed bolts, and hang-dogging, which is sort of an old term. It really just means that you rest on the rope and practice the moves and then try to link the route in one go. And there were people like John Backer, who was kind of like the rock police, the ethical police. And he really believed in climbing in the purest style, which meant that you had to start from the ground and climb on site if you could. That was the ultimate goal, which still remains the ultimate goal for, I think, any true free climber. We want to do it in perfect style. And then after that, it's just a matter of how long did it take and how many tries and all that.
And this symbol, who cooked this up? This is the Stone Master symbol. It's been preserved in chalk on this boulder for 30 years or something. Anyone who erases this chalk design off the boulder, it's immediately replaced. It's like a piece of living art.
Yeah, I think it's great. And Camp 4 itself is actually a historic site, and that's the way it was saved by Tom Frost. Single-handedly, he paid $250,000 for a lawyer to actually designate Camp 4 as a historic site, because otherwise the company that was running Yosemite concessions wanted to get rid of it, get rid of the dirt bags, and replace it with employee housing or something.
So dirt bags won.
Dirt bags won, and Midnight Lightning keeps its history and its lightning bolt.
So after the dirtbag era, things changed a bit. About what year did the competition scene begin for you?
So I had left California. I was paying my own way through college through my earnings in this survival of the fittest competition. And actually, Dave Roberts invited me to come to the Schwangunks for an interview. So I said, sure, I'll come and check out this new crag, because I loved having the chance to see new areas. And back then, the known areas were California scenes, obviously Southern California and Yosemite, and Colorado, and the Schwangunks. And, there were other places, but those were kind of the main places. So I basically fell in love with the place, the culture, the opportunity to go to school and be near a climbing area. So living there, I met Jim McCarthy, who is the president of the American Alpine Club. And the French Alpine Club invited a team of American climbers, and actually one Taiwanese climber as well, to tour some of their famous crags, because they were proud of what they had recently done in free climbing. They're like, yeah, well, let's show the Americans our limestone, which I'd never seen limestone. We were living in Vegas briefly, and they pointed out this light-colored Chaussee rock, and they said, that's limestone. So that's all I knew about limestone. But somebody had told me, Scott Franklin, I remember telling me, yeah, limestone's really fun. You'd really like it. And so I said, sure, I'm going to go. I'll go. So we went to Paris and went out to Fontainebleau. And then the closest area around there is another place called Les Sausois, and then the Verdun and Buttes. So it was an amazing experience to climb on this limestone and try some of this really hard pocketed climbing. I'd never put my fingers in a finger pocket. And the Verdun Gorge is kind of like the French Yosemite. It's got a lot of history and exposure. You actually start on the top and rappel down to start these routes, so you better be able to climb back out. But I was on this one climb called Take It or Leave It that had recently been done by Catherine Destavel, who also was filmed, like Patrick Edlanger, by this famous filmmaker, and they both became instant celebrities after these movies. So she had done Take It or Leave It, and there was an Italian guy that just happened to be visiting the Verdun when I was there, a guy named Marco Scolaris, who's actually still very much involved in the whole development of climbing, and I think he's probably the head of the whole international climbing that's prepared all this format for the Olympics. So he saw me on this climb and said, you should come to this competition. And Catherine had won the year before. The very first one was in 1985.
Where was it?
It was either Arco or Bardonecchia. I didn't go in 85. I tried to go, but I didn't know how to access that. There was no internet, and I didn't speak any French at that time. So it turns out that Marco said, hey, come to this competition. They paid my expenses, and it was an amazing experience.
Was the first time you participated in a competition, did something inside you say, this is what I want to do, or a thing I want to do? Were you hooked immediately on that scene?
Well, I'd competed in other sports, so I was familiar with performing in the competition setting. Actually, I competed in running, too, as a way to train for the survival of the fittest. So that part was familiar to me, but it was so foreign to be in that situation in climbing. Usually you're out with your friends in nature, not with all these people watching you. I mean, imagine enthusiastic Italians watching.
Applauding.
And yeah, they were totally into it, and that was surprising. It was also surprising as an American to see that they chopped down trees and used cement to make the climbs difficult or easier or whatever. And they were pretty disorganized. It was a little disappointing the way that they changed rules, but we won't go into details about that.
But while that was sort of blossoming and gaining momentum in Europe, competitions, it did appear in the US, but there was always this undercurrent of like, competitions, it's bullshit. And there was never really a really open-armed acceptance of it in America.
Even in Europe, they had a petition that went around, and a lot of the top climbers, the ones that were known and already sponsored, signed this petition saying, we don't want competition in climbing, because it seemed to be against the grain of the culture. But very soon after that, there was a push in that direction, and I think climbers changed their mind, and some of those people that signed that petition actually ended up competing and doing quite well.
And of course, it probably didn't hurt that there was cash prizes and cars, and you could win a car. You won a car, didn't you?
Yeah, well, see, this was before there was sponsorship in American climbing. There was no tradition of sponsorship, and in Europe there was. People like Patrick and Catherine and some of the mountaineers, alpinists. But in order to attract people from all over the world, they offered nice little prizes, and they paid my expenses to come for actually probably the first year or two. Because the American Alpine Federation was not paying for us to go and be a part of the team, which later happened. And French and Italian and most of the other countries had a budget for that.
I just remember being amazed at how it seemed like a world of difference between literally the kind of climbing bum life that we used to have. Then you'd hear about, did you hear about Lynn? She's over in France now, and she's like competing and making all this money, and you seem like rock stars. There's probably a hell of a lot of envy, as I recall, but there was this feeling like, wow, what's happened to climbing? And we thought you guys, it was like throwing televisions out of hotel rooms into the swimming pool, like Led Zeppelin and all those big guys in the rock bands. And
that actually did happen, but it wasn't me that did that.
Tell about that.
I won't say who. There was a little spat between two people, and a television ended up in a pool.
See, it always happens. Television has to go out the window. So there's you and Catherine. And for years, it seemed, at least in the media, that you two were locked in this mortal combat in the competition world. And were you?
Well, the media likes to create a lot of drama and adversary positions like that. But it was actually refreshing to have another woman that I could relate to that actually pursued climbing like I did. Although Catherine is more of an alpinist than I ever was. And she kind of got pushed into the competitions, and I don't think she ever really enjoyed it. But her boyfriend at the time, he was really into it. He liked it. And he became a judge and kind of encouraged her and helped negotiate her contracts and all that stuff. And there was never really any personal problem between us. We're actually friends.
Oh, you say if you run into her, there's not going to be some sort of cat fight? Or anything?
No.
Not even a little one?
Nah.
Yeah, okay. Well, the media certainly does know how to hype things up, but I guess competitions finally came to the US really with that big snowbird competition. Jeff Lowe got it off the ground, built this wall outside the hotel at the ski resort of Snowbird, on the side of the hotel wall, and invited all of the stars from European climbing. And you were in that comp.
It was very exciting. Jeff is a pretty visionary person in all aspects of his life, and he just jumped right in and got, I think it was ABC involved, and they did a television program about it. I think it did help kind of launch sport climbing to some degree, or at least gave it a lot of attention. Mm-hmm. It was back in the early days of route design, which is pretty important for a competition. I think it's one of the most important aspects. And being on the side of this hotel wall, it was pretty bleak, especially for somebody like me. There's no intermediates on walls like that. So I found myself jumping to holds that really were kind of small, so I didn't actually win that competition. Oh well.
And who did?
Catherine.
Ah.
We kept swapping, you know, I won over there and then she won in America, and then she pretty much lost interest in that, and then her career went way more in the alpine world, and she did some amazing things there. So we each followed our true path, I think.
Right. I went to Snowbird and watched that competition, and there's the men's part of the competition where Patrick Erlanger, he wins. He's the only person in the whole comp who got to the top of the wall. And everyone felt just exhilarated to watch this guy do what he did. And you watched it. What went through your head about Patrick?
Goosebumps, you know. It was one of those things where there was a lot of tension in the French, just a few people like Gibet, Tribu, and him, like the classic Southern France and Parisians. So Patrick was one of the last people to climb. Nobody had made it to the top. And it was kind of a cloudy, overcast day. And as soon as he got to the point where everybody else had failed, the sun broke out. And it was just like, you couldn't have scripted it any better.
The Sun King.
Yes. His nickname was Dieu, which means God.
And I can remember listening to the French. I don't speak much French, but I could remember hearing very sarcastically Gibet saying, "Shh, God is commencing to climb."
Yeah.
And then they had to eat their shorts because God climbed the whole route and beat them. And that was really, I think a lot of people in the States, climbers, who were not into the idea of these sport climbing competitions, they got lured into it with that performance, with seeing that competition isn't all bad. I mean, the competitive nature of climbing has sometimes been thought of as like a bad thing in climbing, like an inelegant thing. But it's really there, isn't it? I mean,
it's always been there. It's been there in mountains. I mean, a lot of the alpinists compete for first ascents.
Yeah.
It's a natural part of human nature, but I think that it's an honest way to put yourself out there. You put your ego on the line, and you have to be willing to try your best. And maybe you might make a mistake, or even your best isn't going to win the comp.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. I think anyone who watched Patrick or anyone who did really well, you can feel the energy. You can feel the beauty and the excellence of somebody's art.
Yeah. And speaking of the art of climbing, having watched you climb in the comps, like at that comp years ago, and climbed a little bit with you, you're short of stature, but it doesn't stop you reaching the holds that someone who's 6 foot tall can't reach. And you've got this way of doing it. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, you talk about jumping, but there's a lot more to it than just leaping up the wall like maybe you are like a cat.
Well, I think that everybody has their own unique body type and size and personal dimensions, and that's what makes climbing art, that you can look at the same piece of rock and climb it uniquely different for your body. So a smaller person has less mass, shorter lever arms, so we have mechanical advantages for things like mantling and getting into smaller positions. But obviously when there's a big reach, we have to either step up high or use little intermediate holds or jump. So no matter what your body size is, there's a way to adapt usually. Sometimes the rock or wall might be very difficult to manage because of size, but I think that that's what makes climbing interesting.
So there's no excuse for not reaching the hold?
Well, you can make up for it with strength and ingenuity.
Yeah. Let's have a look at another picture. So.
That is me.
We were talking about going from dirtbag to royalty and, living like a rock star. Explain what's going on here.
Well, the ad is for a perfume called Dare. Anything is possible if you dare. And I just got a call one day. Actually, I don't know how it worked because it was before internet, and I was all over the place. But somehow I got the message, and it It was just one day in a studio. It was pretty novel to have somebody sit there and groom me and do my hair and makeup, and had a blow dryer to have my hair flowing. And yeah, it was pretty novel.
This was in France?
This was in America.
Oh, that was in America. I always thought this was in France. But you were getting gigs like this from time to time, like things that just the average climber earlier would have thought impossible, because climbing is like frowned upon by society. But you found that in Europe, it was celebrated. You lived in France for many years, didn't you?
I moved there in 1991, and I bought a house, a stone house, which was kind of a dream, and learned to speak the language in the process of renovating the house, kind of like Peter Mayle's book, A Year in Provence. And it was an amazing experience just to step out of my viewpoint as an American and question everything again. I felt like a child in a lot of aspects, because when you're outside of your culture, you can start to question all that stuff from a new perspective. So on rest days, I would study the language or do some kind of improvement in my house. And it's actually really easy to get to Germany or Spain and some of the other countries. So I thought it was an amazing opportunity to live abroad.
Well, yeah, I mean, who wouldn't? It was a fabulous thing just to visit France for a few weeks and climb that fantastic sport climbing that I remember doing in the 80s and the 90s. And yeah, I can only be envious of what you could do. But your roots were really still in Yosemite, really, at least a big part of your roots. And you came back from France eventually, and then what?
I'd competed for 6 years, so from 1986 to about 92. And I decided that I could continue to compete, but I didn't want to lose out on what I really started climbing for. I was a rock climber, and I saw that climbing on indoor walls was going in the direction of just training and climbing on indoor walls. If you wanted to be the top in artificial climbing wall competitions, that's what you had to do. And I wanted to move on to different goals in my life, and I went back on a trip to visit family in Southern California, and John Long just offhandedly said, "Linny, you should try free climbing, the nose." And look at those little fingers. So I said, you're right. I've been training for competitions, and I have the background as a traditional climber, and I think that climbing in competitions was good for the mindset of learning how to perform on demand under stress, and having seen what was possible on some of the most difficult climbs in the world, I felt like I had all of the background I needed to go and give it a try. So in 1992, I happened to be working with a French guy who was doing a film, and he followed me in Joshua Tree, and I said, let's go to Yosemite, because Hans Floring's like, Lynn, let's do a speed ascent. So that was kind of early on in his whole speed record on the nose. And so we basically climbed it in a little over 8 hours. And my intention was to look at the Great Roof, because I thought that would be the crux. So I barely saw it, because he's like, come on. And I looked at the roof, and I looked at the face below it, and I thought, yeah, this is worth coming back for. So I did in the following year in 93.
And others had been trying it already. It was the subject of a fair bit of attention, wasn't it?
Yeah. There was even a film, I think it was in the early 80s, of Beverly Johnson, Warner Braun, and Ron Kauk. Ron was wearing a Swami belt, those red 2-inch Swami belts? Yeah,
no
not even a
loops.
harness. Because, they didn't want to encourage falling back then. That was considered failure. And so up on a big wall like that, he's trying the Great Roof, and he's on the lower pitch, and he fell, and if you fell, that was it. You had to go down to the belay and start again.
Pull the rope?
Actually, he didn't. In the clip that I saw, he actually got back on the rock, and I thought, wow, he got back on the rock. But they didn't make it. They didn't realize that, if you wanted to make something like that happen, you had to persevere more than that. The rule on a big wall is Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. So you're going to have problems, and you can't be discouraged by such problems. You have to just look around to another solution.
Well, some of the attempts to free climb the nose, it became a bit obsessive. And people went a bit mad about it, and I recall one climber actually started chiseling.
Ray Jardine. And actually, he was run out of the valley after that, is pretty much what I heard. I wasn't really around to witness that, but there is a section, a key section, called the Jardine Traverse. And you get up to a certain point, instead of going to the right, up to El Cap Tower and the big Texas flake there, where people do this classic pendulum, you just go a little bit across this traverse, and then you join up with a natural crack line. And I guess the first ascensionists didn't really see that they could get across that and into a crack line. Otherwise, they might have gone that way. But then they would have missed out on that great ledge up there.
But, what Ray did, chiseling away on that traverse, just speaks to the sort of obsessive nature of climbers. Like, he was suddenly, probably his brain just flew out of his skull, because he was otherwise a very sane, good climber. And he obviously abandoned the prevailing ethics of the valley. And how would he have not known that people would be upset? Have you seen that section that he's
Well, I climbed across it. Yeah.
And is it visibly chiseled?
Well, if you look at any of the footage, and there's some footage online, you start off a ledge, and you stand on a little foothold that's an indent, not something that sticks out. Now that is a chipped hold. So you stand on that. I have to undercling and then use, it's hard to explain, but anyway, I stand up on that hold and then I jump to a hold. Now a taller climber could just jump, perhaps. And if I was a good basketball player or something, I could probably jump to that hold. Now, having not seen it in its natural state, I don't know. But I don't agree with chipping, and I simply adapted myself to the state of the route at that time, which was already chipped.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I was always under the impression, until I read your book, which is a good book, by the way.
Thanks.
That you spent a vast amount of time trying to figure out the crux sections free on the nose. But
I wouldn't call it a vast amount of time.
No, but I checked the record just before this, and you didn't spend that much time at all figuring these things out. You figured it out pretty quickly. Whereas guys had been trying this and making no progress on, say, the Great Roof and other sections. You arrive there and you start solving this problem that has resisted the efforts of Yosemite's best.
Well, I was living in France at the time, and I had a conversation with my friend Scott Franklin, who said, "Yep, I'll be your partner." He arrived in the valley earlier and basically got discouraged by the scene and some experiences that I won't go into detail about, but he left the valley. He said, "You know what, I'm done, I'm out. Try to hook up with somebody else," and he suggested a few people. I ended up going up on the first 4 pitches with Tommy Herbert, who's T.M. Herbert's son, and he said, I'll be back in 2 weeks. I got to go to medical school now. So I said, see you later. So I went to a trade show, ran into Simon Naden, who entered the World Cup and won in his first year of competition. Amazing person and climber. He climbs on gritstone and knows how to place protection, but he'd never been on a big wall. So we gathered gear together and headed up there, and we made pretty good progress. We got to the Great Roof after 1 day of climbing, so it was our second day. We took turns going up and trying it out and falling and trying other things, and eventually I kind of pieced together a sequence that I thought would work. And Simon, I think his progress started going downhill, and when you're on a wall, there's a lot of factors, strategies, and your skin. Mm-hmm. And when you're hauling bags, it's kind of hard on your skin. So he just said, "Look, I'm not going to do it today, but I'll belay you." So that day, I made it through the Great Roof, barely. My foot slipped at one point, and my head kind of got steadied by the roof, which was kind of a fortunate little stopping point. And so that was pretty good feeling to make it through the Great Roof from the ground. And I thought that we pretty much had it in the bag, but I wasn't sure what was up higher. When I was with Hans Floring, I really didn't even check out the changing corners. I didn't really look at it carefully. So there's really not much of a crack inside the corner, and I was trying to figure out how to get into the corner, and there was an old piton that was sawed off that was just basically plugging a spot where you could get your fingertips in. And Simon and I didn't bring a hammer. That, clean climbing, you don't bring hammers. So we pretty much got stopped on our free effort on that pitch. So Simon flew home, and looking at the changing corners pitch, it looked pretty smooth and pretty unlikely, but I thought about it and decided that it was worth coming back, because I figured that if it's a corner, there's a way to make it work. It's got to be. Opposition between the corner has to work. So I called up my friend Brooke Sandel, who'd put some time into figuring out a variation on the last pitch, and he also had a variation on that pitch. And he agreed to come back, and we decided to start at the top of El Cap, set up a camp, and rappel down, because it's only a couple hundred feet down to the changing corners pitch. We spent 3 days working out the sequence, and in the afternoon, the sun is blasting in that corner. So I figured if I can figure out the moves in the heat, it'll be great if I come back in cool hours of the morning or late evening. And I hadn't linked it all, but I'd done all the moves and felt confident that it was going to go. So after 3 days of work, we hiked back down and started from the ground.
So you pieced it all together. This is the Great Roof, by the way, which is just the most insane-looking thing to imagine free climbing. I mean, do you need fingers like knitting needles to go into that thing?
Well,
Would mine
Tommy
fit?
Caldwell has fingers like that. Actually, he only has 9.5 fingers.
Well,
so
that's probably why I could do it. I mean, it's thin, it's tiny.
It's thin. I was using just fingertips on 2 hands, one hand like this, and then I would cross or cross under. But the hard part is keeping your feet flat against the face, because there really weren't very many features that you could stand down on. Mm-hmm. And they were kind of high on the face, and taller climbers use their feet a little bit lower. So there's the option for taller people to put their feet on actually some pretty good edges that it wouldn't have helped me to use. But being smaller, I can, stay up higher. But as you're moving off fingertip jams, you have to transfer your weight, and it's very delicate. And somebody like Adam Ondra now appreciates my advice to him. When I saw him a few years ago in Arco, I said, hey, come to Yosemite, but make sure you get used to the granite in Yosemite, because it's slippery. And I didn't know if he had any experience trad climbing, but that's a different mindset as well. And if any of you have been following the news, he was scared and impressed by how technical it is. So
Adam Ondra is one of the best climbers around at the moment. He's Czech, isn't he?
yes,
And he basically just kind of got spanked on the nose, right?
I think so. He got stopped on that pitch.
He got stopped.
There's
Yeah.
actually some other great footage if you want to watch. This guy, Jorg Verhoeven, he spent a month in the valley and eventually free climbed the nose. And he makes the changing corners pitch look so desperate, because he laybacks the corner with his feet on the other side of the corner. And just the way he moves his feet, at one point he sticks his foot out and then he grabs a little edge for opposition, and then he kind of moves his foot out so that he doesn't lose balance, because he's right at that balance point. And it just looks so powerful, because it's really just a flat 90-degree corner. There's not anything he's really hanging onto.
So there's several ways to skin that cat.
Exactly.
And so, okay, let's get back to, you figured it all out. When did you go back and piece it all together and free it all? To do a sort of a traditional big wall free ascent, when did that happen?
So in 93 with Brooke, when we hiked back down, we did it then.
Okay.
And then the following year, I wanted to do it in better style, because we actually used the rope a little bit on the bolts that he'd put in. And so basically, I thought it would be just taking the idea of a sport climb and expanding it to a 3,000-foot wall.
You never really thought much of alpinism, did you?
Well, I was offered to go to Mount Everest when I was 18 years old, and I said, that's not my sport. And also I'd lost my brother-in-law, the guy who started climbing with my sister and then introduced me to climbing. So there was 2 reasons. I don't like being cold, and
Even the alpinists don't.
yeah, well, I actually get really cold, my hands and feet. Being a rock climber, having a lot of body fat is not really something that we try to have, and that would help in the mountains. But, some people just stay warm. But it's really more the objective hazards, too. The idea of rockfall, and on our trip to Kyrgyzstan in 1995, I still have this image of you coming up the pitch and seeing this gigantic piece of rock coming out, and I thought, ooh, snow above your head, melting rockfall, that sounds horrifying.
So I guess I have the honor of talking you into one of the few alpine climbs you may have done in Kyrgyzstan, big thing, of a rock formation called Russian Tower. And that's Lynn there, and this is what she thought of it at the top.
That was after 36 hours of movement. We got up super early, climbed all day, and I realized how absurd my stubbornness about free climbing every move was when it was like 4 a.m. and I'm trying to do 512 at altitude. And, so I think that free climbing is a great tool because the better free climber you are, the safer you can be in a certain sense and the faster you can be, but within reason.
You know what? We sort of sped through the nose just a little too quickly. Then you went and did it in a day.
Right.
All 3 in a day. We can't leave that part out of it. So think about it, all 3 in a day. Has anyone ever done it like that since?
Just Tommy Caldwell,
Just Tommy Caldwell.
the master of El Cap.
Well, Lynn, it's been really great talking to you. It's been great knowing you all these years too.
Likewise.
Thanks for coming to Banff. Thanks, and let's give her a welcome.
Thank you.
If you want to learn more about Lynn Hill, I would recommend buying her book, Climbing Free, My Life in the Vertical Worlds, co-written with Greg Child. Join the festivities and help us celebrate 50 years of adventure stories at the heart of the festival here in Banff. Check out our website at banffmountainfestival.ca. This episode was produced by Anique C. and is a production of Banff Centre for Arts and Creativity. The theme music was composed by Jacques Blackstone. A special thanks to our audio engineer Ben Ewing and the production team at Banff Centre, as well as the folks from the Paul D. Fleck Library.